crew on that. It was concerning because I was asking the person on the phone, like, don't you have anyone? No. What?
1 minute. That windstorm was particularly funky because the wind would go one way, then it would shift to go not like so I was walking, they were going all. That's why these trees would snap right off midway up and break.
Because
they just couldn't handle that. All the stress. Yeah.
We ready to go, Sarah?
Yeah, everyone's in.
Okay, perfect. There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Jones, Corporate Officer for Qathet Regional District, and I will call this January 10th, 2024 Planning Committee meeting to order. As this is our first meeting of the year, the first order of business will be election of the chair. I will now call upon members of the Planning Committee for nominations for the position of chair. Director Gisborne.
I'd like to nominate Director Lennox.
Director Lennox, you'll be nominated for the position of chair. Do you accept this nomination?
Thanks to my nominator, I accept.
I will call a second time for nominations for the position of chair. I will call a third and final time for nominations for the position of chair. As no other nominations have been received, Director Lennox is awarded the position of chair by acclamation.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. When I looked at you, I saw Director Doubts in it.
I know we're very similar. Okay, I think you've called it to order. I'm just trying to get through our
agenda, chair.
I think we should give our land acknowledgement that we're we're meeting once again, traditional territory of the Yaroshuk First Nation. So where are we? Sorry, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so number 3, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to be adopted?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Gisborne, seconded by Director Brander. Any additions, subtractions, changes? Seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. None opposed. Number 4, adoption of the minutes from December 6th. I wasn't at that meeting, but I had a look. Can I have a motion to adopt? Oh, thank you, Director Gisborne. Again, Director Brander. Any discussion? Errors, omissions? All those in favor? Carried. No. Okay, I think we don't have a delegation today. We have somebody that's part of a report.
Yes.
Is that how it's going to work?
That's correct, Chair.
No unfinished business. And section 7. So just wanted to touch on this section. We have a lot of correspondence. There's been a lot of work, with our staff right up until, prior to the deadline and after the deadline to receive the submissions. I counted at least 23 emails that were received just on the one topic of the Savary Island water carrying capacity study. So I know we usually just accept this correspondence, but can we speak to this? Is that appropriate?
Chair, if you wanted to speak to it, you could speak to it under item 7. If you wanted to make a motion, I would suggest moving anything to 8.1.
I don't think it's necessary to make a motion in this case. I'd just like to have a quick discussion if everybody's good with that. Thank you. I just took some notes because, like I said, it was a little clunky as we approached this meeting. We want to make sure that everybody who took the time to be involved and make submissions is recorded, that we have time to digest what is said specifically and get it into our agenda. And obviously, if it relates to an appropriate motion, we would probably make one. So I'll just kind of touch on, 23 emails on this subject is a lot. Some of them will be reflected in February because they may have been past the deadline, but all will be recorded. We've read them. It is a great example of community involvement and advocacy. I mean, we don't typically see this type of activity unless it's important, and in this case, we all agree it is important. There was one piece of correspondence that mentioned a relevant topic of the sea level rise aquifer study that was done in, I believe, 2021. And there's some estimates in there about what that means for the island, but and it's based on certain data. And I think that I encourage people to have a look at the correspondence in detail because it will help. But I think that we've already passed a motion recently to fund a water study for this effort. And talking to our staff, it's clear to me that the intent of the water carrying capacity study, quality, all the other topics that relate to water supply and the future of sustainability for the island are definitely part of this discussion. And since I see Ms. Rodden on the call, maybe I could ask you just to elaborate on sort of where we are with all the information that's come in and the fact that I believe we don't need to make a motion to achieve this objective. Can you maybe speak to that, Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair, the concerns that have been communicated by Liz Webster at Savary Island Land Trust and all of the supporting emails for a carrying capacity study. It's great to get this type of feedback from Savary Islanders, and really their concerns will be addressed through the groundwater study to be completed in 2024, and the Savary Island OCP review update. An OCP is a land use plan. It must consider all of the environmental constraints on the land base within the planning area, and policies in the OCP must work within those environmental constraints. So I think carrying capacity is going to be addressed in both the study and the OCP update.
Good. And I think just having a quick look at the current OCP for Savary, water carrying capacity is literally in the plan. So I'm confident and want the other directors to understand that I don't think we need to make a motion based on this correspondence. So Director Gisborne.
Yeah, thanks. I know we've passed a motion to do a carrying capacity study for water on Savary Island. But since we passed that motion, I've taken some time to, try and understand the situation a little better because especially with all this correspondence. And I started taking a look at the provincial government's website and their information on aquifers. And there's 2 monitoring wells on Savary Island. And, if you go and start digging through all their paperwork, they go back from the 70s and 80s, and they've got some reports on there. And there was one monitoring well where they were pumping it down, but they had a recommendation that in the future that they should do like another 48-hour pump down, check for saltwater intrusion, and check to see if there's what happens to the wells around that monitoring well. And it seems like they never actually did the second step. And so I'm wondering when we go to do this water study, are they going to be taking a look at some of those provincial monitoring wells? Because it seems like, because the province is responsible for fresh water in the province. They've got some of the data, as is frustrating all across the province. The provincial government's data is incomplete. They started doing studies. They never really followed up on it. And when you start looking at aquifers, they get really interesting. And I think of, on islands, I was over on Denman and there was a lake that was artesian fed and folks didn't know where the water came from. So they studied it and they found that it actually matched a lake over on Vancouver Island and that it was going through one of these underground seams and then bubbling up on an island. It goes under the ocean and bubbles up somewhere else. So that I think hopefully this water study will answer some of those questions about saltwater intrusion and also you know, where's the water coming from? Who knows? Maybe it's tied into the same system that Lund is. So
Thank you for that. And I think Ms. Rodden can comment if there's anything in specifics, but what I've seen just piecing all these different reports, provincial, federal, what we've done in the past, and you know, it just speaks to that goal that we have to understand the topic as a whole. Ms. Rodden, any other comments on that?
Through the chair, I'll just say that I mean, staff are familiar with the historic reports. We'll be collaborating with the different provincial agencies and seeking additional funds to support the groundwater study. My understanding at this point is that it's not an issue of water quantity, it's an issue of water quality and the density of development on the island and the potential for contamination of the aquifer. So it's really, there is a lot in the studies that have been done to date on nitrogen levels, and that really is going to be the focus on water quality.
Any other comments from directors? Thank you for that. So moving to number 8, business arising from correspondence. There are a couple other pieces in here, so I just want to make sure the directors have the chance to bring that up if they so wish. Seeing none, we'll move on to section 9 reports. So we have a housing needs report for the electoral areas A, B, C, and D. And there's been a project completion. I guess, Ms. Rodden, are we going to have a presentation from you? We have a recommendation, but would you like to do that first? Oh, you're muted, I think.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report and the recommendation relates to the recently completed housing needs report for electoral areas A, B, C, and D. Completing an updated housing needs report was a qathet Regional District strategic goal for 2023 and fulfills a recommended action from the 2021 qathet Regional Housing Needs Report. The updated 5-year demographic and housing needs projections for electoral areas A to D and the updated recommendations for meeting housing needs in the rural areas provide strategic direction for OCP housing policy and actions over the next 5 years to 2028. And the report is intended to be a guiding document, and the set of 10 recommendations that are put forward in the report are pragmatic, measurable, and achievable within the 5-year time period to 2028. And Patricia Maloney of Patricia Maloney Consulting is here this morning to present on the findings of the housing needs report and respond to questions from the directors. So I will pass it over to Patricia, who I believe is online.
I think our corporate officer is looking for the name here. Don't see it.
We do have a participant joining via phone. I'm not sure who that is, but I don't see Patricia online.
Ah, okay.
This is online. It's alternate Director Isaacson listening in.
Oh, thank you, Director Isaacson. Thanks.
Okay, is there anyone in the waiting room?
No. So I guess we could, if somebody does appear, either online or in person, we'll decide if we take the liberty to hear from them a bit later. I think we've got the report.
Yeah.
Hopefully we've all had a good look. Let's go to the recommendation. So we have a recommendation that the board accept this housing needs report for areas A, B, C, and D. Do I have a mover for such a recommendation? Dr. Banner, seconder, Director Gisborne, discussion.
Yes, when I was reading through it, there are some errors.
Okay.
And I'm wondering when it would be an appropriate time to point them out.
Well, maybe right now would be great. Maybe staff will be able to speak to that. Yeah.
On page 5,
Okay.
there's a mention of area D population declining by 0.26%.
Right.
That's incorrect.
Okay.
On page 14, there is a number that it says that the population grew by 4.64%. The latter is correct.
It's funny, I did note that too, and I had a little bit of, they're not huge differences, but that's a significant from a negative to a positive. Ms. Rodden, any comment on those figures? Did you hear
through the chair, if I could just have clarification on, so it's page 5. There was a reference to the area D population, page 5 in the report?
Yes. Page 5.
We got 2 reports.
So is it the report of 94? 94 page report?
The 94 page
Okay,
report.
so we'll go to number 5, which is actually, that's the summary, I guess,
In this data limitation section?
No, this is in the discussion. It would be in the discussion analysis, I believe. I'm just looking for it here.
Oh, in the staff report?
It's in the staff report.
Okay.
What part of the section I'm just looking for?
Project outlines key housing trends in the QRD.
Mhm.
Oh, yes, that is over the 20-year time period.
Okay.
From 2001 to 2021, there has been a decline of the Texada population.
From 16 to 21. But the later statement on page 14 is that the population grew by 4.64% from 2016 to 2021, which is correct.
I'm having a difficult time finding where the second reference is.
So the second reference is on page 14 and 94 on the last section, key housing trends in the first bullet. The last part of that first bullet, then area D had 4.64% over the same time period. I think you, just for clarity, what I heard you say is the first figure was 2001 to present to 2021 was the negative growth. Is it the 16 to 21 that's the positive growth? Is that the
Correct? That is correct.
okay. So 2001 to 21 fairly negative, but in this last 5 years, I guess it is. Just
yes,
more like 7 or 8. Okay, so
yeah.
Does that make sense for you more? Okay. Any other directors?
There was one other.
Okay, go ahead.
On page 49, it says that there were no housing construction or new construction in Venanda since 2005. I went back to the provincial registry, and there have been 22 new construction.
Okay, Mr. Rodner, maybe the discrepancy there and where we're getting our data from.
Well, the data is, there are a lot of limitations to the data for our small electoral area populations, and the fact that we don't have a building bylaw and issue building permits. So we don't have actual data on building. And we rely on the registry that BC Housing maintains. But that is on not every builder registers with BC Housing, because we don't have a building bylaw and require building permitting. So there's a lot of building activity that we cannot track. That was well documented in the qathet Regional Housing Needs Report that predates this one. And that issue is discussed in the section on data and limitations, pages 4 to 6 of the report. So there are discrepancies in the data, but the building data is, it's really very inaccurate.
So I had contacted the Venanda Improvement District and spoke to their administrator who pulled these numbers off of BC assessment.
Okay, so BC assessment.
Yeah, BC assessment data was used as well. But there's discrepancies in the data.
Well, that is good for us to know as we're trying to make decisions based on these reports. So thank you for that. Director Brenner, I saw your hand there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it'd be wise of us to postpone this until such time as Patricia Maloney can show up to actually walk us through it, because I have a question or two as well, and I think it'd be best if she were here to answer it. I don't, unless for some reason there's a time constraint on this, which I don't imagine there is.
Ms. Brown, there's no time constraint, is there?
Through the chair, no, there is not. And yeah, I'm not sure what happened to Ms. Maloney. She was definitely scheduled to be on the call, so something must have happened. And
Yeah.
I think it would be wise to defer until she can be in attendance.
So if the planning staff doesn't see any problem with it, I'd like to push it off until the planning committee. Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Second?
No, I think we can discuss it and then we can postpone it.
Yeah, let's have a discussion. Go ahead, Director Guzman.
There's a motion on the floor to postpone it.
I'm gonna second that.
So we gotta deal with the motion to postpone first.
So let's deal with that.
Are we allowed to discuss motions to postpone? Yeah, okay.
But it has to be to the mayor, sorry, through the chair, it has to be to the merits whether to postpone or not to postpone, and not the contents of the.
Okay. Director Brenner.
I think some of the questions, or at least that I have, would be better answered if Patricia was here to answer them, because the planning staff may not have all the answers. So I think we'll have a more complete discussion if we are able to see the report.
Thank you. Director Guzman.
Yeah. We've had a number of housing items that this planning committee has passed over the last several months. We've heard from our staff that those items are on hold until we deal with the housing needs assessment. Not all directors have had a chance to even speak to the housing needs report at this time. And while I may be in favor of postponing this in the future until all directors have had a chance to speak to this item, I don't think it's entirely fair to the directors to postpone this item before because there's a lot in this housing needs report. And I think we should, dig into it, get a better understanding of it. Naturally, we're going to have some unanswered questions, which I think is fine that we can get those. But there's also a lot of other information and data in here that can kind of help us wrap our head around, some of the next steps around, residential flexibility. And as I understand it from bills 44 and 45, there is kind of a timeline that once a housing needs report is accepted, we then have, I think, until December 31st to make changes to the OCP. So while there isn't a time constraint on actually receiving, once we do receive, then there is another time constraint that comes in. So I think we should, I'm not in favor of postponing it at this point. I think we should have a bit more discussion because we don't have a huge agenda today.
Yes, go for it.
If I may, through the chair, could I potentially suggest a 5 to 10 minute recess so we could fix some IT problems that, or actually Julia has just joined us, but I've received notification that there's just some access issues.
I'll do a 5-minute recess.
I'm okay with it if the other director. Great 5.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's try to.
Do you mind stopping the live feed and then we'll correct this issue?
That'd be good.
She might be trying to get.
Patricia's here. Patricia's in the meeting.
There she is.
My apologies. I was looking for the passcode.
in.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for the little hiatus there. We've worked out our technical difficulties because we're back to our meeting. We have a motion on the floor to refer this to another meeting, but I think the intent of that motion has been accomplished because we have people now available. So if we all agree, we withdraw that motion and carry on with our business. Thank you. Okay. So do we have a vote on that? I don't think if we all agree.
With everybody with unanimous consent.
All right, so we'll back up a notch. Good. Check my notes. So, Miss Maloney, can you hear us?
Good morning. Yes, I can. Thank you.
Were you able to hear the first part of this discussion or not?
I was not.
Okay, so we had a good sort of synopsis by Miss Rodden, but we've got the report in front of us, and we do have some questions. So maybe we just start with an overview from you, and then we can ask you a few questions.
Sure, that would be fantastic. So we'll go to the next slide. We were just going to talk a little bit about the historical growth in the electoral areas, some of the challenges, the census findings, the projections, our draft recommendations, and then what your next steps are. So next slide. The historical growth in the electoral areas has been slow but steady. I think we've seen I'm not moving the slides forward, so if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we did see a bit of an anomaly in Area A during the last 5 years of growth. The thought process there is that could be COVID related, that there are a lot of people who own property on Savary Island and thought it was a great idea to move there during COVID, either early retirement, work from home, or just permanently enjoy the place that they've always owned. We're not sure if that growth is going to continue. We think it's a bit of an anomaly, but nevertheless, the populations have grown in the electoral areas, some more than others. This reflects a number of things, but what we do see, and we'll take a look at the population pyramids in a minute, is that the population is still aging. So the next slide. The challenges for doing housing needs assessments in rural areas are that you do have small populations. It's not like a city or a town. Oh, sorry, no, the one back up to the challenges. Thank you. That we're looking at small populations, that there is generally a lack of services, as in all rural areas. The distances are significant to get to and from places. There's a lack of transit, a lack of infrastructure. We've seen some growth anomalies. The unhoused populations are maybe a little more difficult to identify in a rural area, as they could be couch surfing, throwing up a tent in the woods. They're a little more difficult to observe than they are in an urban area where they tend to meet and congregate around areas where services are provided. A housing inventory in the regional districts is a bit tricky as well, since we don't have really good building data information. And one of the challenges to talking about providing additional housing is that many of the people who live in the rural areas want to protect the rural character. We also have a lot of agricultural land reserve. One of the interesting things that we discovered in this update is that there are obviously a lot of empty houses. There are a lot of houses owned by people, and they are used either by families seasonally, or they are maybe rented out on a short-term vacation rental. But there are a lot of houses that sit empty for a great number of days of the year. We have also found that in every jurisdiction, COVID-19 had impacts on our growth, on our housing, on our shopping patterns, on our work patterns, and this reflects what's happened in the rural areas as well. So the next slide, and this is one that I would imagine Laura has indicated the correction. There were two tables in the report, Table 11 and Table 26, that didn't match up properly. And what we've done is we have corrected that. The difficulty here is that households are provided in the statistics. Stats Canada collects household information. And when Statistics Canada collects one parent information, they call it an economic family, and it's in a different category. So it's a bit awkward. It's not really comparing apples to oranges, but it has a different title. So one parent economic family we have used to demonstrate how that impacts people and the rent that they can afford to pay. And so what we've done is we've taken those median incomes, taken 30% of that, which would be considered 30% or less paying rent or money on shelter is considered affordable. So what is an affordable rent for these areas? And what we're seeing is, based on these median incomes, $1,530 a month would be considered an affordable rent for a household, and $1,350 for a one-parent economic family. We'll call it, for the purposes of this report, a household. And then as we go to electoral area B, $1,650 a month for a household, or $1,612 for a one-parent economic family. 19 area C has the highest income and can take the highest rents at 19 or 1625. Sorry, 19 a year, 1625. Actually, area B has the highest affordability. Area C, 1625 and 1350. And then we get down to area D, Texada, 1360 and 1270. So what we're also looking at in the report is what some of the market rents were as of 2023. And this is getting close to what people can and can't afford, and in some cases goes beyond. I think the other important thing to note is that we did not project up incomes. We originally were thinking that we would project up incomes based on the municipal pension plan cost of living numbers. But what we've discovered is that salaries did not increase at the same rate of the cost of living. And so it would be not representing what people are actually earning and what they can actually afford. So this table, table 26 and table 11, will be corrected to meet these numbers in the final document, as well as anything else that you might identify today. So we can go to the next slide and skip over that, and we go to the population pyramids. So what we've done is we've projected the population for the next 5 years. And these are the population projections that show the age breakdowns. And you can see in all of these, as we go through them, that the qathet Regional District electoral areas have an aging population. We are not seeing the attraction of young people and families maybe as much as we would like. There are a number of reasons for that. One is that the aging people, and I have to take offense, I don't think over 55 is aging anymore.
Thank you.
But what we're seeing is that these people are choosing to stay in their own homes longer. They're either able to do that due to other services, or maybe family members living there, or the fact that our aging population is healthier than it was 20, 30, 40, 60 years ago, and they're able to stay in their homes longer. This means that this housing unit is not coming up on the market and is not there to provide housing for a family. So this is area A, with a housing deficit calculated based on the housing needs of 23 housing units for the next 5 years. The next slide shows area B. A little more balanced in age, but still a little heavy on the over 55s, with a housing deficit of 75 units. Housing area C next, again, heavy on the aging, with a housing deficit of 140 units. And finally, area C, or area D, the projections, again, aging, significant difference between the aging and the younger age groups, with a housing deficit of 100 units. Now, these units, as we talk about in the report, can be provided a number of different ways. It can be provided through accessory dwelling units, secondary suites. For example, on Texada, should the Texada Island seniors project move forward, that could provide housing for between 24 and 36 people. So, which also then frees up market housing, which could attract younger families. So housing is a very fluid commodity. We see in urban areas how a neighborhood that was a young family neighborhood, maybe back in the 70s, by the time you hit the 90s and the 2000s, all those kids have moved away, the parents are aging, and by the 2010s, the parents have moved out and young families have moved back in. So it's a transition, but it does take time. The other thing that we haven't looked at in great detail in this particular study is that we know that there are vulnerable people. We know that there are homeless people. We know that there are people at risk of homelessness. Unfortunately, the regional district is not really set up to handle a lot of those needs, which is why your partnerships, and we'll see in the recommendations, your partnerships with organizations in the city of Powell River are so important, because those people can be housed more successfully in Powell River. And I say more successfully in that, generally speaking, vulnerable people or people at risk of homelessness need to be very close to amenities, facilities, services, and that's just not possible in the rural areas. So if we move to the next slide, we're looking at the housing types that are needed. And what we've done is we've broken down those numbers of units and taken a look at the family breakdowns, the household sizes, and we feel that the breakdown of what the housing unit should be would be 15% bachelor and 1 bedroom, 60% 2 bedroom, 15% 3 bedroom, and 10% 4 or more bedrooms. The larger number of 2 bedrooms, even recognizing we want to attract families, is that seniors don't necessarily want to be squashed into a bachelor or 1 bedroom. They want to have an extra bedroom for grandchildren, guests, company. Maybe the couple sleeps in separate bedrooms. We can't assume that just because they're seniors that they don't need that extra room. So the next slide talks about our recommendations. One of the things, and of course, I'm sure also that Laura has brought you, well, you're fully aware of all the changes and all the legislation and all the new things that are coming down from senior levels of government about housing. But we believe that supporting secondary suites in all residential units would be a strong action to take. And I know that that's happening in a lot of areas in the electoral areas now. But this allows for not only an individual housing unit, but it also allows for a senior who may be wanting to stay in their home longer and being able to rent out a suite and having somebody else there to maybe help them with chores or just to be there to make sure that the main resident, the senior, is fine, healthy, well. So supporting secondary suites in all residential areas is important. And then the second one is supporting accessory dwelling units where provincial septic and water services can be met. We know that the health authorities want to have a minimum 2 hectare size for water and septic. And we understand that. We also understand that wells are not great in every area. So we want to make sure that they meet provincial standards, but that they be allowed wherever they could possibly be located. And the thing to remember too is that this doesn't trigger hundreds and hundreds of units. Most people don't want a secondary suite in their house. Most people don't want an accessory dwelling unit. Most people can't afford to build the accessory dwelling unit. So what we've seen in urban areas where they've made secondary suites and accessory dwellings permitted everywhere is there's about a 10 to 15% uptake. And we don't expect that to be any different in a rural area. So you're not going to see hundreds of these new units. The third recommendation is to promote nonprofit housing societies. Obviously, Texada has been working on theirs. There are others in the city of Powell River to support, promote. Using the word support often implies financial, so we don't want to say that we're committing you to any kind of financial commitment, but to promote and to at least give verbal support to nonprofit housing societies who are doing a very tough job to provide housing for our vulnerable and homeless peoples. Transit is often a very big issue when it comes to where people live and how they can access services. And so working with BC Transit to improve rural transit service would be a really good option. For example, if an opportunity arose in Lund, just as an example, that there could be some kind of a shared housing or a housing project or a seniors project there, it might be a great opportunity, but without better transit and access to the services provided in the city of Powell River, it's probably not going to be successful. So just looking at ways you can work with BC Transit to improve rural transit service would be an excellent action. Promoting public information on available grants. There are a lot of grants available through both BC Housing and CMHC where people can make modifications to their home to make it safer for seniors to live there, whether it's grab bars, ramps, whatever. There are also a lot of grants there to help people make secondary suites legal under the building code. There are grants available for that. So making those grants and making that public information, maybe posting something on your own websites for your own residents would be very helpful to help people stay in their own homes or create a secondary unit. Next page, next slide. So the opportunity is available to partner with an organization called HappyPad, which links landlords to potential tenants. And so that could be something that the regional district could consider doing, promoting a partnership with HappyPad to help people find safe, reasonable places to live. There are quite a few manufactured home parks in the regional district. And while manufactured home parks have gotten a bit of a bad name over the years, they actually have historically provided an affordable option for housing. And so one of the things that the regional district might do is review your current policies on your existing manufactured home parks. And while you might not look at creating more, there may be opportunities to slightly expand the existing manufactured home parks or look at how you might be able to get more pads within the existing park boundaries. And there's two ways of looking at mobile or manufactured homes. One is a park where the tenant either leases the pad and brings in their own modular home, manufactured home, or they can lease the pad and lease the home. There are also manufactured home subdivisions where you actually subdivide out a lot as a strata, and the individual owns the pad and their home. So there's a number of ways of doing this that can provide other options for affordability, and it may require some modification to bylaws to make sure you have a little more control over how these are developed, but it is a very reasonable form of affordable housing. The other one is to develop a process to track rental housing units. And this is tricky. It would have to be more a volunteer basis, but again, if people do have rental units, they could sign up, you could track it, you would know where these are, how many there are, and get some idea. But again, it would have to be on a volunteer basis, and people would have to voluntarily provide their information. The consideration of establishing a regional housing reserve fund. There are a lot of regional districts who do this. There are quite a few regional districts who add a fee onto the property taxes to put into a housing reserve. So there are a number of different ways of doing this, but this housing reserve could be used for a number of different things. It could buy land for an affordable housing project. It could buy a building to be converted into an affordable housing project. It could support other initiatives happening in Powell River that would then maybe provide priority for regional district residents. And there are a number of there are so many new housing programs coming out of BC Housing, the Ministry of Housing, and CMHC that would work with a regional district if they had a certain amount of money to provide grants to complete projects. So it's just something to keep in mind as you move forward. And then the final recommendation is to complete an updated housing needs study in 2028. And I'm sure Laura has mentioned this, given the new requirements for housing needs studies, this study does provide a 20-year projection. It provides a population projection, and it provides a household size projection. So technically speaking, you could say that you have a housing projection for 20 years as well. And that I'll leave the lawyers to figure out the rest of that. But I believe this housing needs study will give you an update into 2028. So the next slide, we look at some of the funding challenges. For example, there are programs that CMHC has, but you don't have the actual need or population size to trigger some of those grant programs. The funding needs to be able to actually affect change and meet the needs. And it's very difficult because being rural, being a small population, and having limited government funds, pretty hard to compete with Vancouver or Kelowna or Prince George when they're trying to get federal money, and the actual numbers of people that they're trying to serve is so much greater. That doesn't mean that there aren't programs out there and there aren't ways of dealing with the housing needs and the needs of your residents. But it's a little more difficult sometimes to get some of the government money, which is geared primarily to urban areas. And all of the regional districts are finding the same issue. So the next steps then would be, and thank you for not passing the motion to delay this presentation due to my technical inability. Accept the report, begin to implement the recommendations, work with your partners, and then plan for the update. And there are a number of partners that you can work with, primarily based in the city of Powell River, but the Texada Seniors Residents Group, I think have a great opportunity and would definitely be well situated to get BC Housing money to complete their project as well. So that's the end of the presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, great. I just checked with our corporate officer. We don't have a motion yet on the floor, so this is a time for questions. So Director, do you have any questions from this one?
We do have a motion because the motion to postpone was withdrawn, so we still have the original motion.
I didn't have a motion.
What we did, that's why I asked you.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Thank you for the clarity. That's why I did ask, but you're busy, so that's all good.
It takes a team.
That's fine.
Sorry,
so I'm trying to follow the procedure. So it is time for any questions relevant to the presentation. Anybody?
If you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, Director Scott had made a couple of points of discrepancy in the report. Maybe you could identify those for you quickly.
Sorry, put it on the spot.
In the staff report on page 49, there was a comment that there were no new home builds in Venanda since 2005, when in fact there have been 22 new home builds. We found
through the chair, the number of new builds that we got was from BC. The BC government, and I think this is part of the issue, is that tracking building permits and maybe building that doesn't have permits is not easy in a rural area that doesn't control and track all of that. So if in fact those housing units are there, we would be more than happy to recognize those.
that we pulled those numbers off of BC assessment.
Okay.
Okay, and I think there was one other.
Well, there was a minor.
I think we
that was settled out with Laura. But there was also another item about affordable housing. And on Texada, there is an affordable housing complex known as the tiny home. And it might be something worth mentioning.
Thank you.
Yes, Director.
I'm not going to take up too much of everybody's time. For clarity's sake, we're talking about two reports. We don't have a motion on the floor, I don't think. And people's opinion might be different from one report to the other. We have a housing needs report, and we've got a staff report about the housing need report. So I think
Clarity, thank you.
I think it's good practice to, when we're talking about reports, to
Which one we're talking about. That's a good point.
And, you know, the housing needs study update, I think, is great. Thank you for your work. And it's, you know, I'm not a member of the planning committee. I'm city councilor, and I find the information very valuable. Not detailed information as far as the city goes, but you can extrapolate from one to the other about affordable rents and things like that. And that's useful. You know, one of your suggestions is promoting a nonprofit housing society or dealing with funding from the taxes to do that. And I note that the Capital Regional District is just in the process of creating a huge fund. You know, they've got 13 municipalities and I think 2 electoral areas. So they've got a pretty huge population base to draw from, but they've got a huge amount of money in a very small assessment for each property that actually gives them some money to build significant housing over the years. And you know, that's something that's worth thinking about. We may not be in the same league, but if we wanted to cooperate throughout the entire region with the city and the regional district, a small contribution could result in a big impact. Because we don't need to build 5,000 units in the regional district. We need to build a few hundred. And I like the report. It's very valuable information, and you know, and I understand what you're saying when you say that if we don't have building permits and we don't have any property registration, it's really difficult to precisely say how many new builds are underway. In the city, we can ask the planning department, how many building permits did you put out last year? And they have an answer in about 2 minutes. And we can say how many are in the chute for this year, and they can give us an answer. But if you don't have any property registration in the regional district or any building permits, you don't have that information. And you can do building permits without requiring a lot of extra stuff to go on top of that, just to have the knowledge. But that's my 2 bits, and I'll limit it there because I could talk all day.
Thanks, Director Dowd. Anybody else have any? Here's one.
I think Director Elliott was first.
Okay, well, let's do that then. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is not so much about this report. It's fairly straightforward about, you know, where the numbers are coming from and what you're recommending. My question has to do with whether there's information that you're aware of, and maybe you can comment on the idea of housing authorities and whether the province is actually looking at supporting municipal governments or regional districts with planning that might go into creating housing authorities that look at long-term sustainability around providing housing over the long term. It just, yeah,
Ms.
just a
Maloney
question.
or Rodden, whoever wants to take a stab at that.
I will defer to Pat.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, there is a lot of discussion about creating housing authorities. Comox Valley Regional District has just put out a request for proposals to try and figure out if it's viable for them. Obviously, the Capital Regional has one. The Cowichan Valley Regional District is currently trying to determine if it's viable for them to do one. The problem is that there's a lot of costs involved in setting up a housing authority. There is information that is required that may not be available right now, the way your planning situation is in the regional district. The comment about the Capital Regional District, I have just completed the the report for the Capital Regional District on a housing acquisition strategy, and they are looking at increasing the per capita tax to create a fund, and they are also looking at borrowing $85 million to act as seed money for the Capital Regional District to actually initiate housing projects. Now, all of those housing projects will be in the urban areas. None of them will be in the electoral areas. None of them will be in the rural areas. They're just finding that affordable housing projects need to be close to services and facilities, and we developed location criteria for them that would identify where this new affordable housing should go. And transit, shopping, medical, education, government services, all of those need to be within a bus ride with less than 20-minute service, or walkable. And so that's why it's very difficult for rural areas to deal with this. So the Housing Authority would probably rest more with the city of Powell River and work with the regional district and the electoral areas to whether they financially contribute to it, or how it would work to maybe provide land, or it's very, very difficult for rural areas, but definitely housing authorities, we're going to see more of them, but the larger centers have the financial resources and capacity to get them going much faster than smaller and rural areas.
Thank you. Director Guzman, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to jump into some of these recommendations. The first recommendation, which is support secondary suites in all residential areas. And I'm speaking Area B here. Area B's official community plan already supports secondary suites in all residential areas and has for over a decade. So I don't see how that recommendation really impacts my residents. The second one, support accessory dwelling units where provincial septic and water servicing standards can be met. During your presentation, you said that that's like one dwelling for every 2 hectares. That's not the case. That's not true. As I understand, for subdivision, it's 1 hectare, of course, based on the water and sewer conditioning and requirements. But I know of a number of properties that do meet provincial septic and water servicing standards where there is a much higher density than 1 dwelling per hectare. And quite often that has to do with the capacity of the septic system and the water system. And one of the barriers to kind of, having a secondary suite or a third suite is a property owner that wants to get, some rental pads or something like that. They got to put in, once you get 2 dwellings, it becomes a water system, which means that there becomes a kind of like a floor that you got to meet, a threshold for water treatment. And then you also usually got to upgrade your septic system to handle that. So property owners will quite often go, okay, well, I have to spend a certain amount. And when they hire their consultants, they're usually recommended that, you got to go bigger if you want to make more money. So some folks they're hearing, no, get 10 units or 20 units or 30 units, and that seems to be contrary to what the intent of the official community plan is. And what I've actually seen in the rural areas is, people tend to settle around 6 or 8 units, which seems to kind of be okay with the community and the neighborhood, but that doesn't really conform with our official community plan policies currently. So that was one of the reasons why the proposed changes to Area B's OCP actually was defeated back in, I believe, May. And there has been correspondence that our planning committee has received about, trying to find what that balance could be, which is, floor area ratio, building coverage, like lot size coverage, which some other jurisdictions are doing. So I'm wondering, in this second recommendation, could we support accessory dwelling units where provincial and septic water servicing standards can be met? But would that also come with like additional clarification and requirements? So that way we don't end up with, property owners putting in 40 units because if you put in the proper septic and the proper well, you could put in 40 units. The only restriction right now is the OCP doesn't conform to that.
Okay, Ms. Rowden, I see you have your hand up.
Through the chair, I heard Pat say 2 hectares, and I think that was just a slip of the tongue. The provincial legislation is 1 hectare. And in the recommendation table on page 67, in the description, there is a reference that the provincial government has mandated that accessory dwelling units be permitted in all residential areas across BC. For rural properties without community sewer and water servicing, accessory dwelling units are permitted on parcels larger than 1 hectare where provincial septic and water servicing standards can be met. So our OCPs have to be consistent with the provincial legislation, and the new housing legislation that's mandating permission for secondary suites and accessory dwelling units, those units still have to be consistent with provincial legislation. And so those are our goalposts. And so I just wanted to clarify on that.
And I think to add to that comment, that you've educated us before that those are the minimum expectations, and then we as a board approve any additional requirements that we have in our areas. Makes sense. Thank you. I'll just see if there's any other director questions. I'm gonna, Ms. Maloney, I see you had your hand up. No? Ms. Maloney, I just give you an opportunity. Go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair, I want to say I'm sorry. I if I said 2 hectares, I often think in 2 acres. And if I could just address, there are many rural areas in British Columbia that have previously approved, probably back in the 70s and 80s, half-acre lots with individual well and septic. And that was the standard back in the day, that you could do a half-acre. And as standards changed and they required more distance separation from wells and septic, they absolutely changed that from a half-acre to 1 hectare, and I'll say it properly. And that's why we do have thousands of those existing lots right now. I lived on Gabriola and lived in one of them. One of the reasons that we moved off Gabriola was because we had a 40-year-old septic and well, and I was terrified that they would fail, because what do those people do? They have to do rainwater harvest and then a very expensive sewer system, because they cannot do another traditional sewer system on a half-acre. That is why the health standards increased it to at 1 hectare, to allow for additional space to put in another well, drill another well, or put in another septic system. And I do think that if the standards can be met, then the densities can be accommodated, but the water and sewer are the big conditions.
I'm going to interject my first kind of question, comment, and it's really, it speaks to both the report and your material. When I saw area, I represent area A, when I see 23 homes, I know that doesn't feel right. And then I see area C as 140 homes, juxtaposed with your explanation of that it's like half rentals in area C versus area. So there's these big differences in how we're using our homes, and this big population increase, of course. So my question was around accuracy, and I think both on how people are telling us that they're using their homes and their lack of, the unhoused. This morning on my way in, I drive past the same motorhome on the side of the highway with his little wood stove going. And I know that guy. And I know he's probably not filling out information that helps us to understand his particular situation. And then I times that by the other folks that I know in my area. And that's just area 8. You go up the logging roads, you see this. So I think that's probably a very conservative number, at least in my area. And coupled with the lower incomes, again, in the area A, highest cost, lowest incomes and that pressure that you know, aging in place. I'm glad that you referred to that, because many of our folks are literally faced with that now. Then gauging the community movements into town. I have several of my constituents that have young children that move to Beverly to raise their kids, and then they want to come back out, and they've managed to find a way to do that through relatives and all this. So I think that I appreciate the report, but I think we have to be mature enough to look at some of the stuff we can't quantify. So I know it's not really a question, but it's just what came to my mind. So I saw Director Gisborne again.
Yeah. My question around accessory dwelling units and density on properties, I don't think was answered. The conversation became around like lot sizes and subdivisions for the distance between wells and septics, but you can have multiple dwellings on one well, and you can have multiple dwellings on one septic system, and that's where you can have like a 2-hectare property. You can have space between a septic field and a well, and get 20, 30, 40 units on there. There's a property just down the road from where I am where they have roughly 40 addresses on their property, and they're under 10 hectares. So my question that I was asking was about the number of like dwelling units, the number of accessory dwelling units being allowed on the property. And I recognize the provincial legislation, which says, you know, you need to allow secondary suites all across the province, which is great. Totally support that, because that is already consistent with the area BOCP. But in a rural setting, we still have a desire to protect the rural character, where, you know, when someone comes in, buys a large piece of property, 9 or 10 hectares, and they go, okay, how do I get my money back on this? I want to put in some affordable housing units. And they start looking at, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 units. That starts getting the community up in arms, because, you know, we want to try and find a balance in the rural area. So that's where I think recommendation number 2 should also come with some kind of caveats of like, okay, how do we maintain that balance with the rural character and rural setting? Recommendation number 3, which is promote nonprofit housing societies, I think is a great recommendation. However, we are the planning committee, so we're focusing on OCPs. So recommendation number 3, I think we should actually kick over to the committee of the whole, because that would be kind of something for the greater region. And that would also be the same with recommendation number 4, which is work with BC Transit to improve rural transit services, because we deal with the transit system over at committee of the whole. Number 5, promote public information on available grants. I know the BC Housing has announced grant funding for homeowners who qualify will receive 50% of the cost of renovations of up to a maximum of $40,000. And that's something that the province has pushed, and I see Patricia Maloney nodding her head. I presume that's what this is recommending, that we inform the public about these grants that are available for secondary suites. Okay, I'm seeing nodding from the planning staff. The issue I have is that at the planning committee, we only represent the electoral areas. And the provincial government, with the eligibility of these grants, only applies to the 161 incorporated municipalities. The electoral area residents do not qualify for those grants. We're out in the cold. And that is something I've heard from our AVICC electoral area rep, that, you know, she's quite frustrated that the province comes out with these grant fundings. And then when you dig into the details, we find out that in the rural areas, our residents are out in the cold. So I'm wondering if maybe that's something that we should be sending a letter telling the province, saying like, hey, we have housing issues too in the rural areas, and you know, the province has said rural areas, you got to do accessory dwelling units, but you don't qualify for the grant. So I think that can be something that we can push at AVICC and UBCM. Promote partnership with Happy Pad. All for that, but I think that can also be something for committee of the whole. Manufactured home park policies, I think, is going to be a bit of a challenge because the area BOCP policy currently is that we encourage manufactured home parks to be located within the city of Powell River. So to have new manufactured home parks is going to be I think, a bit of a challenge. We're gonna have to do a bunch of public engagement. Increasing the density of our existing manufactured home parks can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because one of the challenges that can arise in manufactured home park is if the folks have, you know, a little bit of space around them, they tend to have a bit kind of better neighborly, and the kids get some place to play. If they get too packed in, they start using the term slum, which I think is very unfortunate. I do think there is a great opportunity here, though, because we do have an area in Area B that has 2 manufactured home parks in the OCP, but the zoning bylaw restricts those manufactured home parks to 1 dwelling per hectare. And I don't know of any jurisdiction where you have a manufactured home park where it's 1 dwelling per hectare. So I think that might be a little bit of a stretch when people consider that a manufactured home park. So I'm not sure if we need a motion to, you know, ask for a staff report, because the issue is our OCP doesn't actually define the density of manufactured home parks. So trying to make those 2 things consistent can be a bit of a challenge. And I'm wondering if there is maybe an idea of a number of dwellings per hectare or lot coverage that might work for manufactured home parks, because I find 1 per hectare is a little just me speaking, it's a little silly. And talking to some of my residents, they think it's one of those like historical things that have just kind of.
A question for staff?
Yeah, for the staff or the consultant, because I'm just wondering, like, what would be a good, you know, density of a manufactured home park, because Area B's OCP doesn't actually define the density for manufactured home parks.
Maybe we haven't delved into that, but Rodden, comments?
Through the chair. Yeah, I think the intent of that recommendation is just, I mean, it's recognizing that there has been a trend in people looking for more affordable options, and manufactured homes, mobile homes provide an affordable form of housing, whether they're renting it, leasing it, buying it, and that we do have these limitations in our current policy framework, and it might be worth researching and engaging with the community about that. That's what the recommendation is about.
Okay, good. And the other items, with the exception of complete and updated housing needs assessment, so number 8 and number 9, I think, are also good items for the committee of the whole. So when we do pass this motion, which I hope we do, I would also put forward a motion that we forward the report to the committee of the whole, because some of these action items, I think, do fall in line with some of the rural services, and in some cases our regional services, and also our social planning service. So those are some of my main comments on the recommendations. There is one item of concern, though, that comes up in a lot of housing needs assessments of just how we do these things in North America, which is the perception that low-income individuals should be housed close to municipal services. Natural urban growth in the old world, the old country, was low-income people lived in rural areas, high-income people lived in urban centers. And what we've kind of done in North America, and Philadelphia is a great example, is the concentration of poverty in the urban core. And what that quite often causes is high-income individuals moving out into the rural areas and creating development pressures on agricultural areas and natural assets, and kind of promoting urban sprawl as, you know, the low-income individuals cause trouble in their neighborhood because of, you know, concentration and pressures, and those with money then move out and start putting pressure on the farmland. And as someone who lives on a farm, we love low-income people because you don't make a lot of money farming.
So I appreciate the comments. I think that we flushed out a lot of material here. These are recommendations. So I think that it's up to us to take these away and explore all the facets, because there's multiple things here, and directors made good points. Appreciate the presentation. So if there's no further discussion or questions, we'll get to the motion to receive this recommendation. All those in favor of that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Maloney, for your involvement here.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for my tardiness. Thank you.
Figured it out. That's all good. That's all. Okay, moving right along here. New business 10.1. Planning committee responsibility for planning services impacting land use decisions for areas A, B, C, and D. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll put the motion on the floor. If someone gets a seconder, I'll speak.
Okay, I'll second that. Go ahead.
Thank you. I put this motion on the floor, or submitted this motion, because you've got a lot on the plate of our planning department, and we saw in the strategic progress report that the Savary Island OCP is becoming quite a large workload, and there is an item in there to contract out to get that work done. And it makes me a little bit concerned about how much we're putting on our staff. And I'm wondering if maybe it's a good idea for the planning committee to take a look at the action items that we're putting before our planning department and maybe prioritize some of those action items. And myself, I'm a big proponent of updated official community plans, because I see them as kind of like your asset management. If your OCP starts getting too old or too outdated, you start getting more applications from the community saying, hey, I want to update my property so I can get this development. And as we see, when you get a one property application, it can start using up a lot of staff time with phone calls and concerns. And when you really start talking to the community, they start kind of going like, well, we support the OCP, but then we think it should be changed because it's 10 or 20 years old, and in Savary, I think 25, 30 years old at a point. And that creates kind of a division in the community and a lack of clarity. So in my mind, I see OCP updates as like high priority, but that's just me. So I'm kind of wondering about the desire of the rest of the committee, because at the end of the day, whatever we ask our staff to do have financial impacts, and they can create delays in workload. And now with the new provincial legislation around 44 and 45 and 46, that's a whole bunch more workload on our staff. The province has announced that there's funding that we saw in the letter from I think that's coming up at our board, or is already on this agenda, that there is provincial funding, but money doesn't necessarily mean Laura Rodden can work 40 hours a day. So the purpose of this motion is for the planning committee to have a discussion around what are our priorities. We still have another month before our budget is ideally finalized at the end of February. So even if we don't come to a decision today, I want to get our discussion going so that we can kind of start prioritizing what is the priority of the committee so that we can direct our staff appropriately. That's the thoughts.
Thanks for explaining it. I think I'll just, before we go to Ms. Rodden for comment, we'll go to other directors just so we can put it all together and see if you can answer everything in one go. Director Brender.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I was going to suggest before I make any comments, if we could go to Ms. Rodden.
Well, let's do that then. Okay.
Her take on it.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Through the chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just, I have some concerns with the motion, in that it's reacting to the third quarter report. And that was a third quarter report. It was not a year-end report. And by year end and the next report that the board receives, you will see that the planning department has completed in excess of 90 of the goals assigned to it. And over the last 10 years, we always deliver in the 90 percentile for directives assigned to us. And so while my reporting in the third quarter report spoke to capacity limitations, those are inherent, and like we can't predict how many applications we receive. We can't predict how many public inquiries we receive. So there's an ebb and flow over the year where we have to put more attention on an application or more attention on engagement. But at the end of the year, we are able to deliver on the strategic goals assigned. That being said, the new provincial housing legislation is going to create a lot of work for staff. The letter in today's agenda from Ravi Kahlon references that there will be capacity funding flowing, and I believe the board will be receiving a letter any day now with the amount that the qathet regional district will be eligible for. And with those funds, we'll be able to contract planning support or, housing expertise to help us achieve those provincial obligations, and some of the housing work that is perhaps sitting outstanding right now. So that's from my perspective where we're at. I'm feeling like our team of two is well able to handle the work that comes our way, and our OCP updates happen in a timely manner. There's many jurisdictions that don't update their OCPs more frequently than 20-25 years. So
okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. We'll carry on. Director Browner.
Thanks, Chair. But then hearing from Ms. Rodden, the Director of Planning, I don't hear any concern in her voice about the workload at this point. And I'm hesitant to go forward with a motion like this because I get concerned that if the board gets involved with planning committee or planning staff priorities, that those priorities could get politicized. I have complete faith in the planning staff that if they do run into problems with capacity, that they would approach us at that time. So I think it's not a bad idea, but I think it might be a little premature at this point.
Okay. I think I'll add my voice. First of all, hopefully staff understands that this is really trying to be proactive and a helping manner because, we've had a lot of discussion about workloads and then as we observe these quarterly reports, we're literally trying to get ahead of it and really, risk rank, if you will, some of your work, but you do the work, and we depend on you to identify, as Director Brander said, when that's reaching a critical mass, we'll call it. And I do appreciate Director Gisborne saying that maybe we can hold off on this until our final year report and reassess, because I think you've made a good point that was a quarterly report, and we'll get a fulsome idea. I also appreciate for me my first kind of year here where I don't know that in the 90th percentile is usually where you end up. Pretty good statistic for you. So I really do appreciate the intent, but I think at this point, it doesn't sound like it's another thing we need to do, but obviously you will let us know if such things are necessary. Any other comments from Director? Yes, Director Scott.
I have a question. It's more of a point of order.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand. Is this a motion or a notice of motion?
A motion. It's a motion. Yeah. The notice was given and then it was entered as a motion. I think that's how it was.
Thank you, through the chair. I believe this motion was provided prior to the agenda submission deadline.
Yeah. Yes, Director.
Yeah, and just to clarify, and this is in the first document submitted, submission by Director Gisborne, motion January 10th. Items included from the previous strategic plan progress report is not current and up to date. I put that in there as a note to just kind of say, yeah, like this is only a snapshot of a part of a picture of a part of the service. It's not the full the full thing, but we do have budget deadlines. I believe it is the end of March, but we're trying to have our budgets all finished by the end of February. And we do have a few applications that take up a bit of staff time. And I just wanted to let the planning committee know that, Area B is right next to city limits. And over the last few months, I get the occasional call from folks saying, hey, I'm thinking about putting, 20 or 30 units on my property. And what do you think the chances are of, and I'm like, well, call the planning department. And they go, well, I'm still thinking it over, or, they're outside of a zoned area. So some of them just go like, well, I can just plow ahead and do it anyways. And that to me is kind of concerning and eye-raising, and that's where I know I've been banging on the drum of lot coverage and floor area ratios as kind of redefining how we do density to hopefully give the community some a bit more guidance and understanding of what good balance is. Because one of the things I hear from some developers is they go, well, the OCP is, that's 2012. It doesn't apply to our housing needs now. And they get this attitude of, well, I can just plow ahead with it. And, I always tell them, I'm like, well, talk to all your neighbors first, because, they're the ones that are going to be calling our planning department 3 times a day for the next 6 years. And that is one of the challenges with the planning department is there are some things where the board gives them direction, but then when they're getting calls from the public, the planning department have to take those calls. And, that can take up a lot of time. And, someone goes, well, I called the planning department multiple times and I'm wondering where this report is. And it's like, well, if you keep calling them. So that's where this motion is to simply get the discussion going, get it in people's minds. I would also be very happy to postpone this item to the February meeting. And I'm not sure when we're going to get our year-end report, but I do like having this on our mind at least. So that way, when we do get that information from the province about what is the funding going to be like, what are some of the challenges as we start getting into updating OCPs, and kind of setting those priority goals of like, hey, this is a high priority, this is a low priority for the planning committee. So
are you making a motion or not?
just we're well, if no one else wants to speak, I'll make a motion that we postpone this item to the February planning committee.
We have a seconder for that. No. Okay, well, I will second it just so I want to hear the reason why we would look at this again.
Yeah, the reason I would postpone this is we've heard from our staff that there is going to be more information any day now from the province about funding for compliance with their new legislation. Hopefully the province's funding can meet all of the needs and challenges, but in dealing with the province in the past and some of their lack of understanding of the challenges in rural areas, those may have some budget impacts, and as a result we might end up having to have to prioritize some action items over a few others. So that's why I'm in favor of postponing this, because this is kind of a bit more of like a finance committee discussion, but the planning committee is very separate from the whole regional district kind of thing.
Okay, maybe I could ask Ms. Rodden if that timing in February would be helpful, or if that's too early, or any other comments.
Through the chair, I would suggest that the issues being raised will be dealt with through the budget review. And I mean, the planning service budget is part of the financial plan, so those discussions would be the appropriate time.
Okay. Yes, Director Elliott.
I don't have a vote on this motion, but I just have a comment.
Sure.
And it sounds to me like Director Gisborne is concerned that the planning committee might not have an opportunity to make recommendations to the finance debate, and based on the planning committee's priorities. And if all the information is not quite available now to create those recommendations that we might hear at the finance debate, but the finance debate is happening. Postponing might give that opportunity to the planning committee to consider the information as it comes out. And it doesn't seem to harm the process at all to have that on the table ahead of time. Whether there would be some recommendations the planning committee wants to send into the finance debate or not is neither here nor there. I think he's trying to put a place marker to see if they do, given all the new information. So to me, it makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Director Branner.
I still stand on my earlier comment that I believe the planning department would approach us should they find themselves in a situation where they don't have the capacity to deal with what's in front of them.
Okay. All right, any other points? I guess we are looking at motion to postpone to February. So all those in favor of postponing this till February, raise your hands. Opposed? Okay. So you abstained. Okay, so
I can abstain.
well, there's no abstaining
With the majority.
Through the chair.
Is that how this?
For educational purposes,
Yes,
alternate director, there is no abstaining, so no definite motion of a verbal gesture or a hand gesture is taken as a yes.
Okay. It's a tie vote, so it's defeated.
That's good education. Thank you. Okay, so now we're back to the main motion.
Yes.
Okay, which is again this particular motion. Okay, so do we all understand the motion at hand?
Yeah.
Okay. One more kick of the can here.
Very quickly, this motion before us, which we have not chosen to postpone, simply says the planning committee will review and prioritize planning committee action items and forward these priorities to the board of directors. Yeah. So if we pass this motion now, what that means is that going forward, the planning committee will review these action items and have input based on the financial plan. So I'm in support of this motion because not all services should be reviewed in a financial manner at the finance committee. The planning committee is very separate. The planning committee is separate from the committee of the whole. We have all of our other rural services that usually sit in an electoral area services committee at regional districts. Ours doesn't. Those are all merged into committee of the whole. And I know folks have referred to planning committee as kind of the sacred cow. It's like that all across the province because planning committees are very unique. And I'm in favor of this motion because it means that the planning committee keeps the planning service and planning focus in relation to budget and finances at the planning committee, where we can then put those recommendations forward to either the finance committee or the board, because there's a lot that happens at finance committee, and I don't think we should really lose sight of all the nitty gritty of what happens at planning. So I'm in support of this motion.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to speak if I don't see any other directors. At this point, I'm not going to vote in favor of this, although I truly appreciate the intent, and it's based on staff telling us that they will let us know if there's a problem, and our budget deliberations will also be a big part of that. And I also know, as chair of the committee, thanks for the vote of confidence, that we will keep this on our radar and we will be able to reintroduce this at the appropriate time as necessary. So that's any other comments? We'll go to the motion. All those in favor of this motion, all opposed, defeated. Thank you. Now, question period. Any questions? Media? Anybody?
Hello, Chair Galinsky from the Peak here.
Yes.
I am unsure of who the alternate director from Texada Island is, so I'm hoping that that identification can be made for me.
All right. We have Director Scott. Your full name. Do you want the full name and like bio or
full name, please?
Joseph Scott.
Joseph Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. That was my question.
Thank you, Mr. Galinsky. I don't think there's any other questions.
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Alternate Director Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. Question for the committee. I know there was discussion during the housing needs assessment report related to people with housing affordability issues and perhaps the city being better suited, access to services, et cetera. And so, one thought that came to mind for me, a lot of people who live in the rural areas in the want to live there, are close to their community, and their only issue is it's not access to necessarily healthcare or affordable, food like a food bank. Their issue is just housing affordability. And so I'm wondering what you have seen in your areas, the rural areas, whether there is an attachment to place and affordable housing in your areas is a priority, or whether suggesting that people are more interested or it would be more suitable for them to come into the city to have closer access to services would be important. Like, what are you seeing based on conversations within your areas?
Well, we'll go through A, B, C, D, E quickly here. Area A, yes, and yes. I mean, people love where they live. They want to stay there as long as they possibly can. I have many people that are literally facing this aging in place question. And I'm literally building an addition on my house for the first time, a long-term goal myself. So the affordability is probably the main thing. Taxation is part of that. Assessment, we just got our assessment values. Interesting to see if you've changed or not. All those things affect our people, and they're not making more money, sort of thing. So they are willing to travel into the city for services and health, and I think for the size of our area, we have good facilities that they can access. But things like supporting rural paramedicine and care in people's homes and things like that all relates to the subject. So I don't know if that answered your question, but people want to try to stay in Area A as long as they can. So Area B.
Right, Area B.
Sorry, Area B.
Yeah,
I know I'm just drifting here, but
it's okay. To answer the question, so I live on a farm. I know a lot of farmers, and speaking from experience, what I've seen with a lot of old farmers is it's kind of like trying to uproot a fruit tree. They do not want to move. They are very, some folks are like, well, I've raised my family here. I've, put my blood, sweat, and tears into this farm for 30 or 40 years. And they plan to die there. And that's where there's a big kind of perception difference between urban and rural, where, folks that live in a more urban setting, they go, well, I got some kids, I got to sell my house and buy a house that's a bit bigger that meets my family's needs. And out in a rural area, they go, well, I got some more kids, so let's make the barn bigger. Or, they do the adjustments because and this is where the perception that I've had a shift is, when I'm talking on my home, I've explained this to my family, say, when I think of the home, I don't actually think of the house. I'm thinking of the farm, because the farm is my home. And that's something that I've kind of inherited from a lot of some of the older farmers in the area. So we do have quite a bit of that I see in the rural areas, and I'm seeing a lot of individuals who, they've been in the neighborhood, even if it's not a farming neighborhood, and they've been there for 40 years. They're getting on in age, but they plan to stay there until the very end. And that's where having some of that residential flexibility could help. And I really got to thank Alternate Director Isaacson, because during that discussion, I said I was going to make a motion and I didn't do it. So after everyone's had their chance to respond, I have a motion. So it'll be quick.
Just have a point of information.
Yes.
We're now 2 minutes away from 20 minutes before the start of the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a point of information for discussion later in the day.
Thank you. We'll quickly carry on to Area C.
I have nothing additional to add.
Area D, any comments?
The housing needs on Texada are starting to be met. Most people are being surprised by it. There's a housing needs survey that was completed or submitted by the Seniors Housing Society, and overwhelmingly seniors wanted to stay and age in place. But since that survey has been done, there has been a shift, and there's been an uptake in people moving to the RV park, which is expanded. There's interest in the new tiny homes. So people are looking and saying, okay, I can downsize, I can buy the tiny home, I can live in something new. And it's in a very park-like setting. And so there's a shift in the interest.
Interesting. Thank you. All right. I don't think there's an in-camera Yes, Director Gisborne.
Be very quick. I move that the committee forward the qathet Regional District Housing Needs Report Electorals Area A, B, C, and D to the Committee of the Whole, which is later this month.
CEO.
Through the chair, I appreciate what Director Gisborne is trying to accomplish here. But I think it's philosophical in nature. And I think by accepting the report as a whole, staff will have the wherewithal to further those recommendations to the appropriate debate committee. I don't think we need that direction at this moment, because we will do the right thing for the directors.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing that, and since there's no seconder, I withdraw the motion.
Any camera? No. We are adjourned. Thank you.